off of a building.
It is still the most ferocious thing I've ever seen with my own two eyes.
Holy cow!
The odds were very high that we were going to get that eye wall of that Cat 4 hurricane, and we got exactly that.
I'm actually scared this time. This is really bad.
I thought we might die, and I was like, I don't want that recorded.
If I'm going to do this again.
I'm Mark Sudduth, exclusive Fox Weather Storm Tracker. So growing up watching weather coverage as a young man, I thought, I want to do that, but I want to take it to another level.
There is the Sudduth rodeo. We're getting ready to pull that out and get it ready for the Hurricane Landfall Project. Oh, shoot! 112! We got to back up. We're going to lose the window. I'm Mark Sudduth. I'm here in Deerfield Beach, Florida, where the western eyewall of Hurricane Katrina is now coming ashore.
I don't want to just be there on camera with a hat on saying it's windy. I want to show you how windy it is. I want to show you these effects in the field, and I was like, I'm just going to do it. My father's probably the root of most of my weather interest. He's a sailor, he had a sailboat, and taught me a lot about thunderstorms, hurricanes, everything. And he always taught me this idea of perseverance. You know, you get through the hard times, you look ahead, you try to stay positive, but also patience. You know, you got to be patient with things. These storms do need to be studied up close and personal. That's how you do it.
You want to get out of that Tahoe at this point? All right, you think it's all right? Good thing.
You have to take the equipment, whether that be a video camera or weather instrumentation, to where the storms are. The hurricane hunters do it with aircraft. I just figured let's do it on the ground with vehicles and cameras, but that has evolved over the years to where it's become much safer.
Just picked 84 in the Tahoe.
The cameras can go anywhere as they have changed over the years. They went from footlocker size or big batteries and a laptop to now, you know, smaller than a lunchbox. And we can run them for 3 days at a time, all on their own. And we can literally put the viewer in the action of what is happening with the hurricane and even other severe weather nationally. I realized that it's too dangerous to do this in person, in a vehicle, no matter how safe we think we are. It was Hurricane Charley in 2004 near Punta Gorda. So Charley was interesting because it was expected, in air quotes there, right, that it was going to go to Tampa. And so a lot of media attention was focused on Tampa, rightfully so.
Just a short time ago, we received word that Hurricane Charley has been upgraded to a Category 3 hurricane.
If you are in a mandatory evacuation area, you need to get to high ground now.
Almost universally, the cone was shown with a line down the middle that went right to Tampa. And what amplified that line in Charley was that the governor, FEMA, and every other public official went to Tampa, broadcast from Tampa, talked about the threat to Tampa.
Hurricane Charley projected for an almost direct hit on the Tampa area. 1 million people so far have evacuated low-lying areas.
Living in the Tampa Bay area is realizing that you're in the eastern part of the Gulf of Mexico, living in the #1 most vulnerable United States metro to storm surge flooding.
Right now on Fox 5 News at 5, Florida is bracing for a brutal 1-2 punch from Mother Nature. Tropical Storm Bonnie and Hurricane Charley are setting their sights on that state. Hundreds of thousands of residents and tourists were ordered to evacuate. Governor Jeb Bush has declared a state of emergency for all of Florida.
Living in Tampa Bay, it literally looks like a myth. The shape of the area actually makes it more vulnerable to storm surge. And then you consider that the shelf there in the eastern part of the Gulf of Mexico, which runs out about 150 miles, that is shallow water.
Literally before landfall, Charley took a change in track that's not very significant in terms of hundreds of miles, but the angle of approach to the coast was such that it was going to go into Port Charlotte instead, south of Tampa. So we had to adjust quickly.
Roof just came off of a building.
For a lot of folks, that was the storm of reference. That's what people drew comparisons to. It was supposed to make a right. It made a hard right into Southwest Florida, a compact system.
It gets disorganized in Cuba. It gets over the warm waters of the Gulf. It starts to strengthen. Then it really strengthens. Then suddenly it strengthens us to this incredible storm that we did not expect for it to get that strong.
But that tells you a lot about the danger of and the challenge of forecasting for a place like Florida. Any difference left or right can have a huge impact. There are major forecast implications for where the center of that storm moves ashore.
Like we had a plan, but that plan went out the window when Charley veered east at the last literal couple of hours. So we find ourselves on Interstate 75 heading south, and we jump off at exit 170 right there in the Port Charlotte area and went, all in.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, here comes wood. This is real. This is real as it gets. 965 on the pressure, guys. We should be in the eye shortly. I hope. Where is it, Jesse?
I don't know. I don't have coverage.
It's not working. Crap.
It turned into this little tiny hurricane with a little tiny eye. It was like a big tornado.
This is a perspective from inside the motel as this hurricane was coming through. At this point, the winds were picking up. They weren't quite the sustained winds that we would see later on.
We were using a product that's very similar to modern radar now on our phones, but it was on our laptops back then, that basically pinpointed exactly where we needed to be. So the odds were very high that we were going to get that eye wall of that Cat 4 hurricane, and we got exactly that. And it scared me.
I'm actually scared this time. This is really bad.
The eye wall of a hurricane, it makes me think back to the movie Armageddon. They're talking about space and what it would be like on the asteroid. And Owen Wilson says, all you had to say was scariest environment imaginable.
Being in the eye wall is like being in a big tornado, really. In a tornado, the winds are converging in a funnel. This is a different kind of a structure, but it's the same idea that that's where the maximum energy in the hurricane is.
I felt like the best way to describe it is you're on a commercial airline flight and you have about 30 minutes of severe turbulence. I don't mean it's just rattling a little bit and a couple of, oh, whatever. I'm talking the severe stuff that nowadays people are going to pull out their phone and make it go viral. That's us in the vehicle in 2004.
Guys, we got to get down. I think we're getting ready to get in the eye. We're getting ready to get in the eye. It's clear.
That, on the planet Earth at least, is probably one of the worst circumstances that you could find yourself in.
An eye wall is composed of thunderstorms, and they're in some sort of a donut shape, and they're caused by the air of the hurricane converging at that point. And when you have all this air coming from all different directions and it all converges, it doesn't have any choice but to go up.
I'm glad we're not near the ocean, buddy. We would have died today.
I told the guys to turn the cameras off because I thought we might die. And I was like, I don't want that recorded. But everything else we captured on tape, literal tape back then. But we also got data.
And it's relentless if you're in it, because one of these cells after the other comes right over your position until the whole storm gets by you.
You've got wind, you've got surge, you've got flooding rains. It's a very scary, very awesome in both senses of that word, both the terror of it and also the power of nature. It really gives you an appreciation of what Mother Nature can do on this planet.
Yeah, hold on. We're in bad trouble here. Oh, damn. Uh-oh. Eddie, see if you can get us near that piling right there. Get us that piling right there so the stuff won't hit us. Holy cow, we're in the eye! Let me see the camera. You guys all right? Yeah. That shit got all in my eyes, man. Is there a tornado? That damn near pissed myself. That's the eye wall of a hurricane.
I was able to talk to the National Hurricane Center. I called Max Mayfield, the director at the time, on the phone right then and there in the eye of Charley and gave him those readings. And he said, well, I hope you've seen the light. And I said, literally, we saw the light come through the eye. and I don't think I'm ever going to do this again.
If I'm going to do this again.
And when it was all done, I was like, literally, I said, the if I'm going to do this again. And we haven't, not like that. And the remote camera project was basically born in that moment. When it was all over, I felt very defeated and thought, all right, is this even going to work? This is a lot harder than I thought.
What everyone here is worried about right now is that for the Big Easy, this could be the big one.
So in 2005, Hurricane Katrina was the first hurricane that we would put this equipment in and send it out to the internet live. First time in the world that was going to happen.
We are now bracing for bad weather from the top of this state all the way down to the bottom. Here in the south, we're facing flooding, while up north in the Panhandle, they are bracing for Katrina's next hit.
Katrina was 2 storms. It was a tremendous hurricane disaster in coastal Mississippi. It was an engineering disaster in New Orleans.
All of a sudden, the wind jumped up real quick as the core came in on shore here.
What sticks out to me most about the hurricane season of 2005 is its notoriety. This is as bad as it can get.
I told you I was going to bring you a hurricane into your living room. Here you go.
Katrina first became a tropical depression over the Bahamas, just east of Florida. And then it passed over the Miami-Fort Lauderdale area and then dipped down into the Gulf.
This is what Hurricane Katrina did to Florida her first time around, ripping down trees and signs, flooding streets, and even crashing this overpass onto a street below. Some got caught in the water.
What happened? We were coming down Kendall. We didn't realize it was this flooded, and we just got stuck because of the water. The water got stuck. There was water in the car.
2005 was really the first hurricane season that I remember being in it. I was in college. It was really the first one on my radar, so to speak, that I was forecasting, learning about tropical meteorology as it was unfolding really before my eyes. 28 named storms. For the first time having to go into the Greek alphabet.
When you run out of names in a season, it's only happened twice, you know something really bad is happening.
There was Katrina Part 1 in South Florida, the Fort Lauderdale area, and there was gremlins, as they say, stuff that would go wrong. It was very hectic, never done this before, trying to figure out where to put these huge boxes and mount the cameras.
We're at least 3 days away from another landfall, which means that the families in the Panhandle area once again should take precautions to prepare for the possibility of a storm coming.
Gosh, when you ask a meteorologist what keeps them up at night, it's the Gulf of Mexico.
I don't know, I-10's right up there.
True.
So,
Get down to Waveland that way, maybe.
we have to, but yeah, if the hurricane stays on track, at least pieces of this bridge may not be here.
The forecasts for Katrina were stunningly good for 2005. It was forecast to go essentially where it went days in advance. And we also knew that the Gulf was very warm, but what happened was Katrina ran over these pools of exceptionally deep warm water in the Gulf, which is like pouring gasoline on a fire.
Katrina made landfall last night on the Miami-Dade Broward County line as a Category 1 storm. That's the lowest level of a hurricane, but it was still strong enough to kill 4 people.
Just think about having a bath ready for these storms to feed off of. It's a natural buffet that is just there, untapped energy.
But then there was part 2, Katrina coming to the Gulf Coast. That was extremely challenging, setting the equipment up ahead of time in Gulfport, Mississippi, and then seeing what happened the next day, that everything within a few blocks is literally destroyed.
They got the full force of what had been a Category 5 with 28 feet of storm surge plowing through southern Mississippi.
There was this false notion for a lot of people that what we saw in Katrina couldn't happen in the United States of America. Clearly it could.
We really worry about storms that get into the Gulf of Mexico because things get crazy quickly. Rapid intensification is a higher risk in the Gulf of Mexico. The geography is not on your side. Storm surge tends to be a larger issue.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a test. This is the real deal. And I don't want to panic you, but I want to make sure that you understand that there's a major hurricane that is in the Gulf of Mexico.
The camera systems that we set up for Katrina worked, and we did get some recording of it from a gentleman down in Florida that runs a website that was he happens to record stuff like, and he does like a play-by-play on his own broadcast. And he and I are friends, and he was recording everything that I was broadcasting, which is good because in 2005 we didn't have the cloud, not like we do now. And we had to store everything on VCRs. Remember those? Yes, we had VCRs or a very terrible quality Windows Media video clip on these laptops. So this guy, Jim, recording our broadcast live, kind of screen capturing it, was the only evidence that we had that it worked.
You can see the wind blowing off of that water, and it's just tremendous. Look at that. Oh, my goodness. It's just going to get worse here, folks. We're going to keep a very close eye on this cam.
Any major hurricane is a once-in-a-lifetime event, usually for the coastline. What we're most concerned with, though, is that, is that this is going to be perhaps the big one.
New Orleans was on the left side of the storm. But the circulation around Katrina and the shape of southeastern Louisiana allowed the water to get into Lake Pontchartrain to the north. It's a big lake to the north of the city, and fill up the lake, and that water ran in and bumped up against these flood walls that New Orleans used to protect themselves, that were built after Hurricane Betsy in 1965. The problem was that the flood walls that were built were not built to spec. They weren't rooted in the ground as they should have been, and they collapsed.
This is a Fox News Hurricane Alert. As we've been reporting this morning, Katrina has now strengthened to a massive Category 5 hurricane. Winds now clock to 175 miles an hour sustained as Katrina heads for the mouth of the Mississippi.
Katrina was a failure at the highest order. I mean, with what happened, the loss of life, what happened in New Orleans, the failure of the levee system. It was a perfect human tragedy in the sense that there was this sequence of events that started way in advance of Hurricane Katrina.
Yeah, the end of Katrina, and even today I can think back on it, that's the one that impacted me the most emotionally. I mean, it was a national emergency. It touched everybody.
I do think Mississippi went by the wayside. And it's tough because I understand the other side, the amount of loss of life and the images that were coming out of New Orleans. Of course, they grab a nation's attention. But there's a lot of folks that were going through the same thing in areas that didn't have the TV cameras and in areas that did not have the ability to come back after.
All the eyes went to New Orleans because of the loss of life and the amount of damage. This was a city that was literally changed forever. The population was halved by this storm.
This is really unbelievable. I'm standing on Interstate 10 about 2 miles from downtown New Orleans. If I look over my shoulder, I can even see the skyline from down here, but we can't get there because Interstate 10 is completely flooded, and it's been that way for the past several hours.
The evacuation in Katrina is really misunderstood. It was a spectacularly good evacuation. It's really rare that we can get 90 or 95% of a city to evacuate.
Public officials don't want to ask their residents to leave, ever. They're asking you for a reason, and it's a really, really difficult choice to make for those folks and for the citizens that actually have to do the evacuating.
I think the biggest criticism that I get is you're a fear-mongerer. You're fear-mongering.
Real bad. Downburst, you see that?
Listen, I cut into Sunday Night Football a million times. Justin Timberlake on SNL I've worried that people were going to have torches and pitchforks outside the TV station.
Oh, I've run into all kinds of criticisms, but I think fear-mongering is good in a situation like this. The storm surge that is significant, more than a foot or so of storm surge that is moving and powered by the storm, is either unsurvivable or at least extraordinarily dangerous.
People just don't believe something's going to happen to them. And so the villain is people not evacuating and not trusting the information, and the consequences could be the end of their lives, and that hurts.
The more that people can understand that and feel it, and you can't really feel it by description, but boy, in Mark's videos, you can see it and get the real feeling for the strength and power behind it.
You go on TV and you say 4 to 7 feet of storm surge. It's hard for someone to wrap their head around what that means. And so to have Mark's cameras be able to give us the scientific data to represent what storm surge looks like without putting a human at risk, it's an invaluable resource.
We lost all of our equipment. I mean, it was like, on the one hand, this amazing, momentous situation where we're going to set this stuff up for the first time in history. National Hurricane Center's tuned in. They know we're going to do it. You know, like, some media is very interested in it, and I was so excited about it. The hurricane washed everything away.
The cost of the whole unit is probably, what, several $100. The cost of a human life isn't measurable. So you can throw out a bunch of these units that he's built and have this very unique peek into what a storm looks like, where people should never be.
It was really like an up and down situation where, you know, on the one hand, I was very excited, but then on the other hand, when it was all over, I felt very defeated and thought, all right, is this even going to work? This is a lot harder than I thought.
It's the first full day after the landfall of Hurricane Katrina, and I have come back to Gulfport to try to locate the storm cases. Tomorrow, I will be going over to the Emergency Operations Center in downtown Gulfport to get clearance to go down and try to find the storm cases.
I never saw storm surge till I saw it on Mark Sudduth's cameras many years ago. Before Mark, the only way, except in the rarest case that somebody happened to have a camera and happened to be in the right place, the only way we knew how high a storm surge was after the fact. We would go in buildings and look in closets and stairwells and along walls and so forth to see how high it got, and then go back and tweak the computer models to be sure that they matched what we ended up measuring.
Obviously, the placement of the cameras is key. There's so much thought. Obviously, the time that the storm is going to move in is critical. The available light and knowing that you're probably going to lose power. But you want to be able to capture the best imagery of the storm surge.
That is A1, top of the list, because it doesn't matter that he has these if he doesn't put them in the right places.
Even that little bit of video that we got, I knew that this was going to be helpful in the future. You know, I remember how Max Mayfield, former director of the National Hurricane Center, felt about it, that yes, you lost everything, but this little bit of video that you do have is remarkable because it shows the power of what these hurricanes can do.
All right, here it is. I found it. Amongst all of this debris, here is one of the storm cases. Looks like it's steel sealed. Now I'm going to attempt to get it out.
I think I was the first person that looked at this and thought, you know, holy, this is going to work. The idea of a remote live camera box will work. I just got to figure out how to make it work and not let it wash away.
It has been utterly devastated. I'm going to pan over to my left. You can see the destruction. Goodness, what happened here?
I think the biggest struggles and the lessons learned in those early years is just persistence. Don't give up, stick with it, let the technology evolve. We knew that it would. I mean, in those early days, everything was large, bulky, short run times, unreliable sometimes. We were using laptop computers and they would do Windows updates right in the middle of something, and you just had to be patient, and we did. You're not supposed to see these things. You're supposed to evacuate and not be there.
There's all kinds of debris floating around that have blown off these storage buildings and a shrimp processing building. It's dangerous out here for sure. That is why this whole county is under a shelter-in mandatory warning. Everyone, stay inside.
The fast-moving, rapidly strengthening Category 4 hurricane making history as the most powerful storm ever to hit Florida's panhandle.
There's life before Michael and life after Michael.
I think the one storm that surprised me in terms of how the cameras would actually really show what happened was Hurricane Michael.
It's a classic example of why we fear storms in the Gulf of Mexico and why you should respect the fear too.
Hurricane Michael is the worst storm that the Florida Panhandle has ever seen, and one of the worst power storms to ever make landfall in the United States.
Michael was a bunch of nothing a little more than 2 days before it hit. It just became a tropical storm a little over 2 days before making landfall, and it became a hurricane just over 2 days before making landfall.
The development of Hurricane Michael in the days leading up to landfall, it became very apparent this was going to be a terrifying scenario.
The ability of that area to brew a monster is so palpable.
It's a deadly storm bringing torrential rain and life-threatening storm surge. Winds up to 155 miles per hour, damaging homes, knocking down trees and power lines. Residents describing the storm's fury.
It was terrifying, honestly.
It just came flying through the roof. I heard all the trees snapping and everything. It sounded like a tornado.
We had 5 cameras set up. That's all we had back in 2018. We have close to 20 now. From Cedar Key, Florida to Mexico Beach, those 5 cameras were sprinkled, and every one of them captured something extraordinary. But the one in Mexico Beach really surprised me. As long as I've done this, as much as I know about surge, to actually see what is happening when that Category 5 rolls in before the wind and waves really even picked up.
The environment did not look conducive for intensification, significant intensification, and the computer forecasts all said it was going to continue to be unfavorable for significant intensification.
What was so scary about it, and as we watched this more or less go by us in Tampa, was that the only thing that was going to stop this storm was the Florida Panhandle. It was all green lights and no red lights. It was in this meteorological circumstance that only favored strengthening until that fuel source, the warm sea surface temperatures, was cut off. And that meant that this was a storm intensifying right up until landfall, and it made it incredibly devastating.
You're not supposed to see these things. You're supposed to evacuate and not be there. And that these cameras caught what we saw on Michael, you bet it was very surprising and revealing.
Gosh, you could drive I-10 and you know exactly where it went through. I mean, you're talking about a complete halt.
Hurricane Michael's landfall whipping the coast with 155-mile-per-hour winds and sideways rain.
So in order to have a Category 5 hurricane at landfall, you have to, in some sense, be unlucky, because hurricanes just can't keep going like that. The top can't keep spinning at that rate.
I think the swath of damage moving inland, you look at places like Mexico Beach, and then farther inland to I-10 and beyond, and you just look at the tree damage, and it just looked, I mean, that's what a a Cat 5 effectively is, like a gigantic tornado.
It looked like a bulldozer went through Mexico Beach after Hurricane Michael. It was different than Andrew because Andrew was a windstorm. Mexico Beach and Michael was a storm surge storm that really did the damage.
As long as I've done this, as much as I know about surge, to actually see what is happening when that Category 5 rolls in before the wind and waves really even picked up to where the beach is pretty much gone and all those in-between moments, it is surprising because nobody has ever seen that before and lived to tell about it.
If you've never seen storm surge move in, you feel like, oh, I'll have time to move. I'll have time to get to higher ground. Sometimes you don't have time to get higher ground.
Storm surge is kind of this nebulous thing. You try to quantify water rise and what it would look like.
Everybody knows water, but most people don't understand that a cubic yard of water weighs almost a ton. If they had something that was almost a ton coming at them, they would know they had to get out of the way. There's a small car. I mean, it's an incredibly powerful mass of something that's essentially solid because it can't flow up, down, or sideways.
It may be, like inland flooding, has the potential to be the most slept on and dangerous aspect of a tropical system when people oftentimes are so fixated on how strong the winds are.
You know, seeing is believing. Most people want to know what's going to happen at their house. And I think what's interesting about what we've developed with our technology is in many instances we can actually show people what is happening at their house using our technology. I do worry about what the cameras might see, especially this day and age, of how many we have and where we can put them, that somebody didn't evacuate that should have, and it's live. And that could be very difficult to see. But even watching someone's house be destroyed is difficult to see. But I've learned from the people in these communities that there's this odd level of comfort. And I know that sounds very paradoxical, but at least they know what they're coming back to. We look at Mexico Beach, it was live during Michael, and we saw all those buildings coming apart, and then everything disappeared in that surge. At least we know. There was not that element of mystery anymore, and whatever level of comfort, there's closure, almost instant closure. I know my house is destroyed. I can mentally prepare. People have actually told me they appreciate that, as paradoxical as that sounds.
For decades, ground truth has been, after the storm, we go and look at damaged buildings and look for watermarks.
Now I can be in 20 places at once and show people these impacts like they've never seen them before.
Ground truth is so important because it helps us improve the forecast. It helps us verify what we're seeing on our instruments. We know what it looks like on radar. We know what it looks like on satellite. We see the observations coming in with our technology. But to be able to see that represented visually, it provides a whole nother layer of being able to forecast a storm.
So we have both those kinds of ground truth now. We didn't have both of those until these incredible images of the storms in action were possible due to the technology that Mark has assembled.
It's important because we do have that evidence. Just like a biologist would use a camera to capture a rare animal, we're capturing a rare event in nature, an extreme hurricane situation. And it's that drive of always trying to do better, capture more fierce impacts, and just continue to sort of amaze the public that this is the power of weather on our planet. And the big headline was this massive, lethal, huge storm surge. And so the challenge was to figure out where to put these cameras to capture that.
Very dangerous scenario right now unfolding here in Southwest Florida.
In 2022, Hurricane Ian came along and sort of changed the course of history for Southwest Florida, as we know. And for us, a big challenge. I had never dealt with that severe of a hurricane in that area in terms of the big storm surge risk.
And we're starting to see this unraveling continue as Ian makes its way in Wow, okay. Stand by, guys. Just try to look around to make sure there's nothing major, but this gust is huge. This storm is just wreaking havoc right now. This is by far the strongest wind gust I have felt since I've been up.
I mean, the storm surge in Fort Myers was epic, destructive, heartbreaking.
Everybody that studies hurricanes has known forever that Southwest Florida was living on borrowed time.
There's some weird fascination with seeing if your name is on the list. I walk into the office as we're starting to get set for the hurricane season, and folks are like, oh, the ice storm, it's Ian this year. And I just had this pit in my stomach after knowing that 6 years ago it was a fish storm. I just had this awful feeling that this was going to be, this go around, a terrible storm. We're losing a lot of the weather data. Unfortunately, that is common when you have major hurricanes like this making landfall. These instruments aren't rated for Category 1, Category 2, and higher intensity, and clearly that's what we're seeing with Hurricane Ian moving ashore.
Sure, we had Charley down there in 2004, but that was 18 years prior.
You have to go all the way back to the 1800s to have a really significant hurricane coming from the Gulf directly in. There were significant hurricanes, but Naples wasn't even there at the time to speak of, and there was not much development along the beach. Fort Myers, the town, was built inland for a reason.
Naples Fire Rescue Department. Look at that. This was crews, again, from Naples Fire Rescue. This was a recording of first responders rescuing a woman from water as Hurricane Ian moved closer to the coast. Look at, they have their gear over their head. It's right outside the firehouse. They're rescuing that woman, and it's water up over their waist. We should report we had a record surge or water rise that occurred in Naples. It was up over 6 feet. That was when the gauge failed. That broke the old record that was set back from Hurricane Irma in 2017. Look at the water up to the door. That gives you a little bit of extra perspective with what's going on.
When I was watching the landfall of Ian and seeing the wind observations hit above 145, and you think about people that are sheltering in their hallways and their houses are taking on a wind gust of 150, it's just crazy to think about that kind of an impact.
It's surreal to even say those things out loud into a microphone on television and know what that translates to in the real world, which is going to be, for these people in Southwest Florida, the absolute worst storm they've ever experienced. That was hell on earth for a period of time.
The big headline was this massive, lethal, huge storm surge. And so the challenge was to figure out where to put these cameras to capture that. And the coastline over there is difficult. You've got Fort Myers, you have Port Charlotte, all these different areas. It's a lot of coastline, a lot of geography, and maybe it even goes up to Tampa. Who knows? It's one of those again.
Ian and Charley's centers hit the coast exactly the same place, and the angle of approach was essentially the same. The difference was the size of the storm. And I think this is an underappreciated and understood aspect of storm surge, is that the strength of the storm is less important to the storm surge than the size of the storm. It's like pushing water in the tub with your hand versus the sweep of your arm. You're going to move a lot more water with your arm than your hand.
I think that people are too quick to compare storms. I think a lot of people with Ian decide to stay because they lived through Charley. And Charley, although powerful, was a smaller storm. Ian was big, and big means crazier storm surge. I think a lot of people underestimated that impact of the storm.
But the thing with Charley is that it was a peanut of a storm. This was a tiny tropical system, very intense, but the wind field was very small. But when you talk about size, Ian just towered over this thing.
It's all that wind that has really picked up and grown in strength over the last maybe 2 hours that has created just almost like a raging river, or maybe even almost like a beach, if you will, with looking at the kind of waves that we're seeing. So it did happen very, very quickly, and that's the concern, right? Is if it continues at this rate, there's no telling just how quickly the entire intersection here, even further inland, could be looking at a very similar situation.
The ocean is slowly swallowing this entire beach. The water line now has been creeping up steadily throughout the night.
Cody.
I'd say at least 20 or 30 feet, and you can see some of the sea foam here now is even further up than the actual water line. So this could be a combination of that storm surge or that high tide, but we are absolutely seeing a lot of water flowing onshore here right now.
Idalia, kind of the same thing a year later. Hurricane paralleling the Florida Peninsula on the west coast. Where will these impacts be the worst? You know, we say we've got 15 or 20 cameras. You're still talking about hundreds of miles of coastline, all these different nooks and crannies where something could be, a camera could be that could capture something extraordinary. I mean, they're both, you know, very challenging hurricanes for all of those reasons.
Incredible bands coming through here. Idalia is throwing haymakers right now into Clearwater Beach.
They stretch out about 25 miles from the center. After Idalia made landfall, I was in Keaton Beach hours after landfall. And it was the dark of night, and I just remember how eerie it was to show up. You're driving into the Big Bend of Florida, and it's just getting wider and bigger, and you're seeing more and more damage.
I think the biggest takeaway from Idalia was that all of these cameras worked in close proximity to each other and capturing different impacts from different points of views.
We keep checking in on the Cadillac that will not make it through major Hurricane Idalia.
We had a camera right on the waterfront. We saw a Cadillac get washed away that was left there.
We were in continuous coverage on Fox Weather. We actually did a simulcast through the overnight period on Fox News Channel. And I remember saying to people, look at that Cadillac, because in 3 hours it's not going to be there anymore. That's a real world forecast.
And as the project has evolved, we've learned more and more to try to get these cameras in a more intimate setting, such as inside people's houses or businesses. We started doing that in 2023 with Hurricane Idalia. We worked with the owner of a business, put the camera inside of his tiki bar, and it was live, and we showed what happens.
We're watching this storm play out in real time. These evacuations had been ordered for hours and days.
If you imagine what we would understand about Ian if we hadn't had remote cameras, we would see wrecked houses like we've always seen before. We would see debris in the street. We'd see boats up on land. We'd see the kind of things that we see after Hurricane Andrew or other big hurricanes that have come along, and it would feel like just another storm.
And then when we put these cameras there, that captures those moments that we ordinarily wouldn't get to see and shouldn't see, because we should be gone from there. We are seeing things that normally humans would not live through. I do this because I want to tell a story of how these hurricanes do what they do. From the start, when we're tracking them, all the way to landfall and beyond. And that middle part, the damage part, where the eye wall comes in and we see that extraordinary video, that's the climax of the story.
I think I've known Mark about 20 years. If I can remember him coming to me with a big box, huge box with a laptop in it and a hole drilled in the side with a camera and cell phone cards, and I'm asking, what are you going to do with this and how long could this possibly last? He was determined to make it work. It's just changed the reliability of the whole thing. But it's great to see the evolution from that first giant box that he brought me.
I would describe Mark Sudduth as authentic. Mark's network of cameras and his hard work as a storm chaser gives us a visual inside the storm that you can't find anywhere else.
He really has a great nose for weather, and it shows when these awful weather events happen and we have these vantage points from places where we would not want people. I've heard him say a bunch of times that there are not 10 Mark Sudduths, but there's one Mark Sudduth and 9 of his kits that can go out.
They got 7 kids. Every time I'm getting ready to go I get that feeling in my stomach that I'm gonna miss everybody. It's hard, especially with young kids, because they feel it. You know, I love playing with them, and I miss that. You know, I'm not there for it. Those are days that I'm not there. But I feel like I am doing something important. I know that I'm doing something that the public appreciates. Not everybody, but most people do appreciate it, and that helps me to keep going. And then when I get home, I'm gonna get that big hug, and then I get to tell my stories. People say, I get it. I understand now. And because of you, I took action. And we have gotten emails over the years about that, where people said, I moved property out of the way, I evacuated my elderly father, or I did this or that, and it made a difference. And you know, everybody says that. I just want to make a difference. I just want to save one life. Well, we've done it, and we've gotten the evidence from people that says that we've done it. But I think even more than that, it's just, again, showing people this raw power like they've never seen it before, where they can experience it like they're there. People that I meet, the events, you know, off-ramps of the Hurricane Highway, might be some small town somewhere. The restaurants we eat at as a crew, all of that is encapsulated into this overall idea of this Hurricane Highway.